Hello there everybody and welcome back to Movie Squirm. Today I'm going to be reviewing the 2010 documentary Never Sleep Again, and this is directed by Andrew Cash and Daniel Farrens. This documentary delves into 8 movies and the TV series of A Nightmare on Elm Street. Now, I have heard about this documentary for quite some time, and as a big Freddy fan, I've always been meaning to get round to it. But it's never actually been on the streaming services or anything. However, the UK finally got this Blu-ray release a couple of months ago, and I went into my local store and I seen it on the shelves and I instantly grabbed it. I didn't think twice, and I knew this was my chance to watch this epic documentary that I'd heard so many great things about. And Nightmare on Elm Street movies and Freddy Krueger himself have had a huge impact on my life. I'm just going to tell you a lot where I stand as a Freddy fan before I get into this documentary, because I think it's important to show you where I'm coming from and what this documentary actually means to me when I get into all the details. But basically, when I was a kid, I had watched movies pretty much all my life. I think I was about 7 or 8 years old at the time. And I mainly watched films like The Jungle Book, Aladdin, all them Disney classics. And I think the highest adult-orientated film I'd watched at the time was Terminator 2. I think my mum and dad let me watch it one day. And that was when I fell in love with cinema. But I heard these kids on the playground talking about this guy called Freddy, who had these razor-sharp claws, he had a burnt face, and he was just killing kids in their nightmares and stuff. And I was just scratching my head thinking, what is this movie? I didn't know movies like this existed. I wasn't even aware of the horror genre back then, really. I just thought, this sounds like the most forbidden movie that no one should ever see. The way they were talking about it, the way these kids were being killed, the way Freddy was being killed at the end of each movie. And I was like, what, there's like 5 or 6 of these damn things, really? And all I could think about was wanting to watch this film. It just got stuck in my head there. And I went home and asked my mum and dad if I could watch it. And they were just like, oh yeah, he's finally discovered what these movies are. And they just, no way would they let me. I don't think my dad was too bothered, but my mum, she just didn't want me to watch this movie at all. And man, I begged and begged and begged for a good couple of years if I could watch this Nightmare on Elm Street movie that I'd heard so much about from the kids at school. All the cool kids were watching it, but she was just having none of it. And I told my friend Jamie, who lived in the same road at me at the time, he's still my best friend to this day, about Nightmare on Elm Street, and he said, you know what? I've got that on VHS. And I was like, let's go and watch that shit right now. So I snuck over to his house. Bear in mind, I'd never seen a horror movie before in my life. And he threw it on, and my God, man, it was one of the scariest moments of my entire life. Bearing in mind, this was A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, probably the scariest one in the entire franchise. Freddy's at his darkest there, and I had to tell him to keep pausing the movie and stuff, and it took me a couple of goes to actually go round to his house and watch a little bit more of it, but I was terrified. It was just had a huge... it scared me to death. It had a huge impact on me there. I just couldn't get to sleep that night or anything. I was scared, man. And to this day now, movies don't really scare me. They're not the same. But that was something I was discovering for the first time back then. These new horror movies that are there to terrorize your brain, really. And I don't think I ever quite fully watched that movie from start to finish because I was that scared. And we were at a car boot sale one day, and my dad just came around the corner and said, look, I've just bought you this. And it was A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, The Dream Warriors. And I thought, you know what? I'm just going to go and watch this now. I'm finally just going to sit down and watch a Freddy movie in my house. And I'm just going to get myself through and put myself through. And I remember sitting in the back of that car on the way home. I inspected this VHS cover, every single part of it. I read the back about 50 times. The car journey home just seemed to take hours, and it was probably only about 20 minutes or something. I couldn't get home quick enough. And I threw this VHS cover in, and I watched that movie from start to finish, and it wasn't as hard-hitting as the second one. I think it's a bit more fun, third one, with the jokes landing here and there, but my God, I just remember that moment when them credits rolled is when I became a horror fan. It's when I became a Nightmare on Elm Street fan, and I just fell in love with the genre and Freddy and this franchise. So that's my story of why I love A Nightmare on Elm Street, and probably the whole reason that I have this channel right now. And as soon as this documentary started, I knew it was tailor-made for me. This was a massive nostalgia trip, and I had a smile from ear to ear during this entire 4-hour runtime. Now, you may be thinking that's quite a long time to sit through, but the beauty of Never Sleep Again is that you can kind of watch this like a TV series. So, for example, when I first threw this on, I powered through the first 2 movies, so they go into depth with each film. But I watched the whole, documentary on part 1, then part 2. I was getting kind of tired there, so I just paused it and thought, you know what, I'll just carry this on the next day. The documentary tells you when we're going to move on to the next movie with this stop motion effect, which is really cool. And the next day, I just went and watched part 3, my favorite in the franchise. So you can kind of watch it in segments there. You don't have to watch this all in one go. And that's the beauty of Never Sleeps Again. And this documentary does so well to give each movie a fair slice of its runtime. It doesn't just spend an hour and a half on the first movie and give you 15 minutes of the other movies or anything like that. It is split equally into 30-minute segments about there. And it just has the fans at heart, because a lot of Nightmare on Elm Street fans have heard so much about the first movie, how it came to fruition and stuff, but we haven't heard too much about the other ones, really, have we? But no, this documentary makes sure everyone gets a fair piece of the cake there, and I just really appreciated that, because they are some of the less popular ones, if you like, or the lower rated movies, but this documentary doesn't care and just says, you know what? Each movie is important in this franchise, and we're going to give it its fair share. And I got to say, the insight into each one of these films, the hard work, dedication, and how each one came about literally just blew my mind. It was like how they created my horror childhood and my horror teen years there. It was just a huge nostalgia trip, and I was just gripped from start to finish. I could not take my eyes off it. Each film had its own little production story going on, which was so interesting to hear. But even films that I kind of don't rate as much as the other ones, they've kind of had a new light shone upon them now. Like, for example, A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 4, The Dream Master, is no means my favourite one in the franchise or anything like that. But hearing how Rennie Harlan had to come in as a director and basically work with no script here, he hardly had any, experience directing or anything like that. He was just hired because he was cheap, but he had to basically make it up as he went along. And I feel like when I watch this movie again, I'll just see it from a totally new angle now. I never knew this, and it was just pretty awesome to hear how that all came about, even if it was a total mess behind the scenes there. However, my absolute favourite thing about Never Sleep Again was seeing how many cast members they got throughout this franchise who were talking about the characters they played and their experiences on set. Characters that I grew up with, whether they were characters I liked, whether I didn't like them, good or bad, I didn't care. It was just so good seeing each one pop up on my screen, one after the other, and just seeing them now and what they've been doing since Freddy, how it's had an impact on their lives, and how much fun they had, how much bad times they had. I could not get enough of hearing these cast members' stories and their experiences. Of course, you got Robert Englund in there, Wes Craven, Heather Langenkamp, who actually narrates this documentary, by the way, which was another great sprinkle on top there. They're the ones you expect, but to see Kim Myers, who played Lisa from A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, someone who I had a crush on back in the day, I've got to say that now, I haven't really seen her in anything else. So to see her nowadays and, talking about her experience on this movie, getting all the Dream Warriors characters in there, Tracy, who's my least favourite character in any horror movie ever. I was even interested in seeing, hear talk about their experiences on Freddy's Dead. It was just such a great treat for fans to have all of these cast members on board. Now, this is a Freddy documentary, but we also have another story going on here that involves New Line Cinema and how that empire was built, because without A Nightmare on Elm Street, that probably wouldn't be the production company that it is today, because Robert Shea took a chance on Wes Craven and went with his script, and they made the movie together, and together the franchise and this production company just blossomed. And I did not expect all that to be in there, so it's kind of like two documentaries fused together to make this ultimate, horror movie fans' dream. And honestly, it was just as interesting as hearing about the Freddy movies, seeing how that grew, how Robert Shea built that empire. It was just movie magic, really. It's the American dream, and that was so interesting to me. And there are a couple of things that bring it down a little bit, not necessarily for me, but for others who may be expecting to see Johnny Depp here. He's not. I mean, they got almost everyone, but Johnny Depp is not in there, and it's understandable. He's a massive star in 2010, wasn't he? And still kind of is to this day. And he was probably wielding a sword somewhere, making a big budget pirate movie, and couldn't commit to this. Also, the Nightmare on Elm Street remake is not in here, but I can't really give that as a negative because this documentary came out in the same year as that remake. I more blame the UK for getting this Blu-ray so damn late. However, when this finished, I was just so satisfied. It was everything I wanted from a Freddy documentary and more. Even when the end credits were rolling, we just had the cast members reciting their lines or their famous quotes from the movies, and I was just grinning, man. I was just like, oh, I remember you said that. This is an absolute must for Elm Street fans. You gotta watch it. And even if you're just a horror fan in general, I can see you having a ton of fun with this. And it was just so interesting to hear all these different stories and all these fun facts of A Nightmare on Elm Street. I'm just going to go ahead and rate this documentary now. I'm going to give Never Sleep Again a 10 out of 10. Despite not getting the odd cast member, this didn't take away any enjoyment at all of this awesome documentary. One of the greatest documentaries I've ever watched. Okay guys, at the end of these reviews, I always like to leave a little fun fact. Now, I'm not going to give you a fun fact about the documentary, but I'm kind of just going to pick my favourite fun fact from the documentary. And it was when Wes Craven was talking about how he came up with the idea of A Nightmare on Elm Street and how he came up with the design of Freddy. And he remembers that it was like midnight and he looked out of his window and there was this guy walking past with the same hat on that Freddy had and this big trench coat. And he just looked up at Wes Craven's bedroom, and Wes hid, behind the window there, and he waited a minute and looked out, and that guy was still looking up at him and pulled a face to sort of scare him and then walk away laughing to himself. And he just thought it was quite weird that this guy was getting a kick out of terrifying kids. And I just thought that was so cool that that's how he came up with the design of Freddy, because that guy was wearing a hat. Okay guys, I hope you all enjoyed this review. Please consider giving this video a like and subscribing to this channel if this is your type of thing. Please leave a comment down below about A Nightmare on Elm Street, this documentary, or where you stand as a Freddy fan. It would be great to talk some Nightmare on Elm Street with you guys, and I'll try and get back to you all, I promise. So thanks so much, and I'll see you all on the next video. Take care.